The term Hoabin culture was first used by French archaeologists working in northern Vietnam to describe Holocene period archaeological assemblages excavated from rock shelters. The related English adjective Hoabinhian has become a common term in the English-based literature to describe stone artifact assemblages in Southeast Asia that contain flaked, cobble artifacts, dated to c. 10,000–2000 BCE. The term was originally used to refer to a specific ethnic group, restricted to a limited period with a distinctive subsistence economy and technology. More recent work uses the term to refer to artifacts and assemblages with certain formal characteristics. Baxonian is often regarded as a variation of the Hoabinhian industry characterized by a higher frequency of edge-grounded cobble artifacts compared to earlier Hoabinhian artifacts, dated to c. 8000–4000 BCE. Pre-Hoabinian technology. Hoabinhian outlined in his paper his definition of a lithic technology that occurred before the Hoabinhian. He found primitive flakes in stratigraphy below Hoabinhian pebble tools across several sites in Southeast Asia, which led him to name the flake technology Hoabinhian, named after a large assembly of flakes found at the Nguom rock shelter in the BCE province in Vietnam. Hoabinhian technology is also claimed to be a continuation of the Sonvian technology. History of definitions. In 1927, Madeleine Kalani published some details of her 9 excavations in the northern Vietnamese province of Hoa Binh. As a result of her work, the first Congress of Prehistorians of the Far East in 1932 agreed to define the Hoabinhian as a culture composed of implements that are in general flaked with somewhat varied types of primitive workmanship. It is characterized by tools often worked only on one face, by hammerstones, by implements of sub-triangular section, by discs, short axes and almond-shaped artifacts, with an appreciable number of bone tools. Despite the general terms of the definition, Kalani's Hoabinhian is an elaborate typology as indicated by the 82 artifacts from Sao Dong that Kalani classified into 28 types. The original typology is so complicated that most Hoabinhian sites are identified simply by the presence of sumatroliths. The chronology of Hoabinhian artifacts was assumed to be Holocene because of the extant fauna found in the assemblages and the absence of extinct fauna by Kalani and others working before the availability of radiocarbon dating methods in the 1950s. Problems with Kalani's typology were exposed by Matthews, who analyzed metric and technological attributes of unifascially flaked cobble artifacts from Hoabinhian levels at Sayok Rock Shelter, Kanchanaburi Province, west-central Thailand. His aim was to determine if Hoabinhian artifact types described by Kalani could be defined as clusters of constantly recurring attributes such as length, width, thickness, mass, length-width ratio and cortex amount and distribution. Matthews found that Hoabinhian types did not exist, and instead Hoabinhian artifacts reflect a continuous range of shapes and sizes. Following his archaeological excavation and surveys in Mae Hong Son Province, northwest Thailand, Chester Gorman proposed a more detailed definition as follows: a generally unifacial flaked tool tradition made primarily on water-rounded pebbles, and large flakes detached from these pebbles. Core tools made by complete flaking on one side of a pebble and grinding stones also made on rounded pebbles, usually in association with iron oxide. a high incidence of used flakes. Fairly similar assemblages of food remains, including remains of extant shellfish, fish and small to medium-sized mammals. Her cultural and ecological orientation to the use of rock shelters generally occurring near freshwater streams in an upland karstic topography, edge grinding and chord marked ceramics occurring, individually or together, in the upper layers of Hoabinhian deposits. Gorman's work included a number of radiocarbon dates that confirmed the Holocene age of the Hoabinhian. The term was redefined in 1994 by archaeologists attending a conference held in Hanoi. At this conference, Vietnamese archaeologists presented evidence of Hoabinhian artifacts dating to 17,000 years before the present. A vote was held where it was agreed that the concept of the Hoabinhian should be kept. The best concept for Hoabinhian was an industry rather than a culture, a techno-complex. The chronology of the Hoabinhian industry dates is from late to terminal Pleistocene to early to mid-Holocene. The term Sumatralith should be retained. The Hoabinhian industry should be referred to as a cobble rather than a pebble tool industry. The Hoabinhian should not be referred to as a Mesolithic phenomenon. Geographical distribution. Since the term was first used to describe assemblages from sites in Vietnam, many sites throughout mainland and island Southeast Asia have been described as having Hoabinhian components. The apparent concentration of more than 120 Hoabinhian sites in Vietnam reflects intense research activities in this area rather than the location of a center of the prehistoric Hoabinhian activity. The oldest Hoabinhian complex was discovered at Shaodong, a large rock shelter in Yunnan, China, 40 kilometers from the Burmese border. It is the only Hoabinhian site discovered in China. Archaeological sites in Terengganu, Sumatra, Thailand, Laos, Myanmar and Cambodia have been identified as Hoabinhian. Although the quality and quantity of descriptions vary and the relative significance of the Hoabinhian component at these sites can be difficult to determine, recent archaeological research indicates that variation in Hoabinhian artifacts across regions are largely influenced by local, region-specific proximity to resources and changes in environmental conditions. Beyond this core area, some archaeologists argue that there are isolated inventories of stone artifacts displaying Hoabinhian elements in Nepal, South China, Taiwan and Australia. The Hoabinhian and plant domestication. Gorman claimed that Spirit Cave included remains of Prunus, Terminalia, Areca, Viscia phaseolus, Pisma raffioligenaria, Trappa, Piper, Maduka, P. canarium, Alurites, and Cucumis layers dating to c. 9800850 BP. None of the recovered specimens differed from the wild phenotypes. He suggested that these may have been used as foods, condiments, stimulants, for lighting, and that the leguminous plants in particular point to a very early use of domesticated plants. He later wrote that, whether they are definitely early cultigens remains to be established. What is important, and what we can say definitely, is that the remains indicate the early, quite sophisticated use of particular species which are still culturally important in Southeast Asia. Indiana, 1972. West. G. Solheim, as the director of the project of which Spirit Cave was part, published an article in Scientific American discussing the finds from Spirit Cave, while Solheim noted that the specimens may merely be wild species gathered from the surrounding countryside. He claimed that the inhabitants at Spirit Cave had an advanced knowledge of horticulture. Solheim's chronological chart chart suggests that incipient agriculture began at about 20,000 BC in Southeast Asia. He also suggests that ceramic technology was invented at 13,000 BC, although Spirit Cave does not have ceramics until after 6800 BC. Although Solheim concludes that his reconstruction is largely hypothetical, his overstatement of the results of Gorman's excavation has led to inflated claims of Hoabinhian agriculture. These claims have detracted from the significance of Spirit Cave as a site with well-preserved evidence of human subsistence and paleo-environmental conditions during the Hoabinhian. Viet, however, focuses on mainly Hoabinhians in Vietnam. Within his wide range of study of this area, but is a site he works on that is dated to about 5th to 6th millennium BC to the end of the 3rd millennium BC. Within this site, Viet sees that the food Hoabinhians mostly focus on a mountainous shellfish, nuts, and fruit. Interesting enough, the site even shows a new shellfish species that they consumed, an as yet unnamed species of freshwater clam of Corbicula spp. Species are known to live in swampy areas and lakes. The general food sources of Hoabinhians were gathered from the following environmental conditions: limestone rock mountains, mountain water sources like streams, small rivers, swamps and lakes, the valley earthen surfaces. Hoabinhian stone artifact technology. An experimental Hoabinhian assemblage was created and analyzed by Marwood, which identified variables and methods that are the most useful in analyzing Hoabinhian assemblages. In particular, he advocated for the use of a new method involving the dorsal cortex location of a flake. This method in particular was found to be especially useful in determining reduction intensity and may prove instrumental in answering broader archaeological questions involving subsistence, geographic range, and domestication. Based on Marrick's own research and Shou Kongdeje's, behavioral ecological models were applied to examine human behavior through lithic assemblages which found in Thamlod and Ban Ray rock shelters. In theory, high frequencies of pre-processing should reflect logistical mobility strategy. However, at Thamlod, a high frequencies of pre-processing but a residential mobility strategy and a low intensity of occupation was observed. We can see an internal conflict between models. A multiple Optima model is proposed to explain this contradictory result. Multiple Optima model allows more than one optimal scenario and is valid to explain high time devoting lithic technology and more residential mobility strategy in the same time.